Good evening. It is now February 15th. Happy day after Valentine's to all of you. There's been things that have come up in recent weeks that I think deserve discussion. They kind of relate to things you've heard me talk about before, but let's talk about them in a bit more detail. So, the highest purchasing power that the American minimum wage ever had back in 1968, a lifetime ago for most people, it was about the equivalent of just about $12 an hour. And it has declined since then. At this point, the purchasing power of the minimum wage is, well, let's face it, a minimum wage job will not get you an apartment. It will not get you food. It is not enough. That's related to the way currency moves, and we'll talk about that at another time. Right now, let's talk about the minimum wage and what people are saying and think about what that means in a little more depth. It's very easy to think about things in very narrow terms, and it's almost never useful. Small ponds make for small thoughts. So let's start by discussing what is being said. Why are people on the right trying to stop the minimum wage from rising? And more importantly, why do they say they are? Well, they say they are because if the minimum wage goes up, they will be forced to eliminate jobs and replace these jobs with robots. They say that the minimum wage increase will reduce the number of jobs. And certain think tanks on the left agree that it will. It will reduce poverty, but it will also reduce the number of total jobs. Okay, now let's look at that. So the assertion being made by, among others, by the way, the former CEO of McDonald's, is that if the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour, they will be forced to replace human workers with robots. Dissecting that, firstly, they are lying. No one is forcing them to do anything. They would say the laws of economics are forcing them, but the laws of economics they're talking about are manufactured. They're not actual natural laws. They're created by human beings to set out a set of standards. Which brings me to the next point. The only reason that those workers at $7.50 an hour have not been replaced with robots is cost-benefit analysis. The accountants and actuaries for the major corporations that employ minimum wage workers have looked at it and said, yes, we could get robots who could do these jobs, but it would cost us more than $7.50 an hour. And those same actuaries can now look at the possibility of a $15 an hour minimum wage and go, okay, we can get workers for $15 an hour, or we can buy machines to replace them for less than $15 an hour. More than $7.50 an hour, but less than $15 an hour. And what does this show? On the surface, it shows there will be, or they assert there will be, fewer jobs. That they will simply replace these now economically challenged workers who already don't make enough to eat and pay rent, as I already pointed out, and they will replace them with robots that are now economically viable. And a person who worships the market, the god of the market, will say, oh, well, that's what has to happen. No, bullshit. And I'm sorry about the language. Bull. It is not what has to happen. It is their interest is exclusively in continually increasing their own wealth. so they will do what they have to do that. They are not community-minded. They are not patriotic in any sense of the word, in any country. We'll get to that in a minute. They are willing to do whatever they have to do to increase their wealth. If it destroys other people, it destroys other people. If it destroys the society, it destroys the society. They'll do it. And what this shows more than anything else is something I've said for years. The economy is a construct. The economic laws that they're talking about are constructs. They're not real. There's nothing sacred about them. There's nothing natural about them. They are created, and then they are propagandized down to people like you. I recognized this in my first secular semester of college when I took an economics course, and I had no background, and the guy was an arch-conservative who talked about the broken window fallacy and the failure of Keynesianism, and I still recognized it. It was obvious. It is obvious. It is a construct, and it is a construct which may have made sense when it was formulated during early capitalism, and it no longer makes sense. Now it is simply a mechanism for a very tiny group of people to become wealthier, and that brings us to the other point. A handful of very wealthy people, Nick Hanauer being a major one among them, he's worth a fair number of $1 billion, have been fighting this. And fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And Hanauer wrote, and I've mentioned this before, a memorandum to his fellow plutocrats, his fellow billionaires, and he said, never in history have we had this type of separation in wealth inequality, what they commonly call wealth inequality, and income, and not had the system fall, become a fascist state, or the whole civilization collapse. And he's right. The 1780s, the French Revolution was predicated on something not much worse than it has now become in the United States. The Russian Revolution in the 19-teens occurred because of this type of economic segregation and separation. The Chinese revolt that led to Red China resulted from something very similar. Nor are they limited. Now, the French Revolution was arguably neither right nor left. It was anti-royalist, so I guess there are people who could say it was on the left. But, however, you don't have to look much further to see that, no, not all of them were from the left. The Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, partially driven by religion or a veneer of religion, but largely driven by economic dislocation and similar problems. The Egyptian Arab Spring a few years ago came from the center, not the left. The Iranian Revolution came from the religious right of that nation. I could go on. The important thing is, when you reach a certain point, the people break. And when the people break, there's a violent revolt. We got a taste of that earlier last month. And I'll talk about some of that in a second. But what you see with what is happening now, and Hanauer has pointed this out in lectures, he's pointed it out in TED Talks, he's pointed it out in articles. More than 50% of his very wealthy friends, other billionaires, keep planes ready, guarantee a place for their pilots and their families if they have to flee, have investments in other countries, and have fortified, bunkered facilities in those countries. Many of them keep helicopters available to get them to their planes. Think about this. They know this is a construct, and they know they're pushing it. And they're pushing it through propaganda. They're pushing it through turf root groups that look like grassroots groups, but look at their funding sources. Groups like QAnon are a tool of these people. The middle class in the United States reached its height between World War II and the 70s, and it has been shrinking ever since 1980. It was the dominant form in the United States. Now it's less than half. Yes, the shrinkage is slow, but the shrinkage is steady. The upper echelons of the socioeconomic structure are consuming the normal, everyday people. They're drawing the wealth upward. And it shouldn't be a zero-sum game because it doesn't need to be a zero-sum game, but they're making it one. The tax cuts in the 2017 tax bill, we're just entering the first step of a structured tax increase for the middle class that was written into that bill. And it will strike us every 2 years, I think till 2025, increasing our taxes by a little bit because their tax cuts are permanent in the upper 1%. As long as they can keep the people adequately propagandized to keep them acting against their own interests, using any tool they have to, religion, nationalism, racism, sexism, homophobia, they don't care as long as they keep you out there voting for them. And what scared them is there was the beginning of a revolt, and it doesn't matter where the revolt comes from. I talk to people from these groups. They hate all the elites. They didn't view Trump as an elite. He is. They hate the corporations. They hate the elites. And the Republicans try to point them at a handful of elites like Soros, and for that matter, like Hanauer. But the moment you dig more than a couple of levels below the surface, it fails. This is why 30 of the 40 largest corporate donors to the Republican Party have either paused their donations or withdrawn, because all of a sudden the Republican Party is beginning to look like the party of revolt. We don't need a revolt. All that will do is crush everyone to the bottom and see domination by either Russia or China, maybe India. India would be okay, as a world power. What we need is to change the economic system. And I know I am a broken record. We need to recognize the values of technology. We need to recognize a better future for humanity. And we need to pursue those goals. We need to change the political economy. There's nothing sacred about this model. There's nothing even particularly good about this model. It was necessary in early industrial capitalism. It is rapidly becoming unnecessary. An announcement this week. They have found a way to use a certain variety of carbon nanowires to enable them to generate electricity from ambient moisture in the air. They can produce generators that will go in your house, and it works in the Sahara Desert, so you don't have to have a lot of ambient moisture. You could have a device in your house that powered your house without even using solar. Batteries that now have millions of cycles of charge have been successfully made and don't even use the rare earths that the earlier varieties of batteries do. Three-dimensional printing is continuing to gain in leaps and bounds. I could go on and on and on. Technology has now solved the energy crisis. All we have to do is utilize that technology, and over time it will also solve the climate change crisis. And it costs us nothing extra to use. Will we? I hope so. Will we change our economy, or will we pursue the dark path of maintaining power to a tiny group of elites while we become an autocracy? And you and I and our children and everyone else lose all of their rights. I hope you'll join me in insisting on the change, not the loss of everything we value. Thank you.